What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Garage Strength Podcast, and I am here with three-time co-author, world champion of the year, Earl Kunkel, king of the PA press.
Yeah, someone put my fourth championship on hold.
And we've got arguably the strongest strength coach on the planet, Will Ratelle, who currently is a strength coach at University of North Dakota. He's working with tennis, basketball, the University of North Dakota football team, along with a whole bunch of other accolades that he's done. He was an All-American FCS linebacker at North Dakota, went on and continued to play in the NFL, bounced around on a couple of practice squads, and then played in the CFL as well. So, Will, thank you for being here today on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I want to just go right into this, and I think that when I see somebody, or when I try to maybe engage, or even just sort of watch and slightly troll, and I think one of my first trolling comments towards you was that you just love Zercher squats. But I want to just go through and I like to just paint a picture right away where it's like, if you have an athlete come in, so let's say you have an individual come to North Dakota, what is like the first thing that you're looking at? What is the first thing that you're trying to observe or analyze or study in their movement? And then how are you making, right away, what is your decision-making process off of like the first week that you might have an incoming freshman?
I just want to get them to squat well, hinge well, press well, like all of the basic barbell movements. I want them to do all that stuff first. And most people, I can get to do that pretty well within like one session. And then like if we need to do a couple extra sessions trying to figure all that stuff out, then we'll just start doing the Olympic lifts. And then that takes a little bit longer, but that's really my goal, just trying to get them to move well with the barbell.
So you're teaching, so you would be bringing in some Olympic lifting movements essentially within like the first 2 to 3 programs.
Yeah.
Or 2 to 3 workouts per se.
Yeah, that would be like within the first week. They're already ollie lifting.
So are you looking at this is like one of the big questions that I had when you're looking at, let's say, like a football player versus a basketball player versus a tennis player, whatever. Do you have in your mind, like, okay, we've had athletes in the past, or when I've studied this, these specific athletes have, even using you as an example, like looking at your numbers potentially as a linebacker in college, these are the numbers that I hit. This is the deficit of the individual that I'm working with right now, who might be a linebacker. Do you have like specific benchmarks that you're working towards, or is it more movement pattern based?
It's probably more movement pattern based. It's hard for me to compare myself to athletes I work with because I am a lot stronger. Like comparing myself to my peers, I'm a lot stronger than they were like in high school and college. And so it's hard for me to really compare like numbers that way, because my expectations of what's strong and what's not strong is probably a little bit higher than most people. So yeah, it's really like movement pattern based. And we're just going to load the shit out of all of those movement patterns and just progressively overload them and get them as strong as possible, as quickly as possible, and for as long as possible.
So do you think there is a point of diminishing returns ever in regards to strength numbers?
There are, but I think that point is a lot later than what most people would say. And once you get to that point, I don't think that you have to like stop training for something. Let's just say, for example, hypothetically, a point of diminishing returns for a 225-pound male football player is a 450-pound back squat. We'll just say that. Once they reach that point, I'm not going to stop training maximal strength. We're just going to find novel ways to train that quality, So like the point of diminishing returns occurs, but then you can continue to train that quality just in a variety of contexts. So instead of back squatting as frequently as we do, we would front squat more, we'd Zercher squat more, we'd squat off the pins more. Like we'd just find all these different ways to load the lower body and the lower back in the same manner, but a little bit differently.
Okay, so I think that that does help. And I literally wanted to get into this as quickly as possible with all the like going deep into everything. walk me through. Okay, we basically got to see like your intake workouts, let's say with an individual. Let's now walk through. Okay, you've got an athlete. Let's say you've got a tennis player, a basketball player. What specific type of periodization model would you be using from that top down? Do you use a periodization model? You don't use a periodization model? And then how do you say, let's say, how do you balance that with their actual sport specific training in season versus out of season?
Yeah, I would say I don't use periodization. I guess if you're going to call what I do as periodization, it's just going to be concurrent periodization. So we're training all qualities at all times, just emphasizing one quality a little bit more than the other. And then how do I marry that with their sport specific training? It's a good question. I don't have really a strategic plan to do that. I just I talk to them about what they're doing in practice. If they're increasing certain loads of various things in practice, then we'll have to reduce some things in training. But it's all very like conversation based, and we're just making adjustments on the daily. So nothing's really planned in that way. So like, for example, I work with a kid, his name's Tice. He's a hockey player. And in hockey, they don't do a lot of jumping. So we're always going to hit like that aspect of some plyos, trying to get that stimulus for him. But then sometimes his legs are trash because he plays hockey, and sometimes he'll have like a doubleheader 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night. And then he'll come train with me the next day. We're still going to get that stimulus in. We're just going to reduce the amount of time we're spending on that stimulus, So it's always just like, hey, what are you doing in practice today? What'd you do yesterday? When's your next game? When was your previous game? How are you feeling today? Is there anything we need to reduce a little bit? Do we need to cut anything out of the training session? But we're still gonna try to stimulate all of those different qualities.
It's pretty cool. Sounds like it's like an auto regulation with the periodization through like input of what the athlete did, and it's like adjust sets and reps and volume based off of that. And I assume you do the same thing with intensity then too.
Yep.
I also think it's like, that's probably what you should be doing. Like, you're just imagine that you're like talking with your athlete and getting that feedback. I think that's, and even finding out what they are doing, but then also trying to gauge. I'm assuming that you're trying to gauge what their voice is like, or what, oh man, I'm really tired from X, Y, and Z. Like, it's going to help you see, and they might even tell you that they're fatigued, and you might see like, hey, they're still in pretty good shape. So it's like, I think that's like this thing. It's like, why do we make things so complex when you can just talk to somebody?
Right. I think most of the athletes I work with are pretty honest with me too. But then again, if you get someone who's going to lie to you and say that you're occasionally going to get someone who doesn't want to train. When you're working with like the collegiate sector, you got athletes on teams that you have to work with. They're required to come in for training, but they're going to lie to you because they don't want to train. So they're going to tell you they're really fatigued, or maybe put them on a jump mat and they know there's a certain number that they have to jump. Or I say if they jump at a certain number that's lower than like their average, they know that they're going to get like a modified training session. They'll do things like that, but you just make the adjustments based on what you think is best for them.
So you're using a jump mat. Like, how frequently would you be using a jump mat in training?
So last season with the volleyball team I worked with, we did jump mat testing every single day, and we kind of had it set up. I basically had like a model or a system set up that if you jumped lower than like whatever number I had for you on your workout card, if you jumped lower, there's already kind of like a model in place of what your adjustments are going to be for that session. So let's just say, for example, everyone's back squatting today, and some people are the plan is to jump. Sorry, the plan is to back squat sets of 5, but you jump a little bit lower than what you're supposed to. Now you're just gonna do doubles and triples, something like that. So everyone already has like the modified plan in place in case they jump a certain number that's lower than their average.
This may be obvious,
or their standard deviation.
This may be obvious, but the intensity stays the same. Just the reps come down.
Intensity would stay the same.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Generally speaking, intensity will stay the same.
So let's say you have somebody whose back squats 100 kilos. They're going to do 5 sets of 5 at 80K, you're going to do 5 doubles at 80K in that case.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. All right. So like, I guess that's sort of, mining down. It's like general periodization model, not really. I guess my question is that by choice, or is that based off the fact that you're working with college kids and it's hard to set that up, or a little bit of both?
Probably both. That's kind of my preferred method of training too, but it definitely works well with college kids and the schedules they have, their practice schedule, class schedule, having to go to like academic meetings, all that kind of stuff.
Let's call this the Ratelle dynamic concurrent periodization model.
There you go.
Okay, so
Brandon, I'm curious before we go on, what do you do for the upper body in that same vein? Like you have the jump mat test with lower body. What do you do for the upper body?
Same kind of thing, but I'm less concerned about that. But yeah, if they're bench pressing and it sets a 5 for the day, we'll just hit some doubles and triples instead. It'd be the same kind of thing. But like if we're doing like dumbbell work, nothing's going to change.
Okay, so let's go off of that. What is, you've got like your model of how you're essentially like might be setting things up throughout the year, which I'll get into some one specific thing I wanted to bring up. What would you do? Let's mine a little bit further down into like a week. How would you lay out a week? You've got an athlete that comes in. How many days a week are they coming in? And how would you establish the workout priority for each day of whatever, however many days are coming in?
Yeah, so I don't control any of the frequency because that's like the coaches for like the teams I work with in college. They control what days they're coming in, how many days a week they're coming in. And with my like private clients, it's really up to like the parents because I don't work with any adults. It's all high school kids. So the parents will tell me if they're going to come in 2 or 3 or 4 times a week. But yeah, once I know what the frequency is, there's certain like buckets I want to fill first. And that's all like, God, it's also going to depend on the sport and what they're doing and what time of season it is. But going back to like the concurrent model, I always want to get some sort of sprinting in. I want to get some sort of plyos in. I want to get some sort of max effort strength training in. I want to get some sort of Olympic variation in. I want to get some sort of hinging in. And then beyond that, it's just filling in the time that we have. But does that answer a question? I don't even know if that answers your question.
I mean, I guess I would say, let's say somebody comes in. I could just pose a little bit clearer. Somebody comes in 3 days a week. Let's say 3 days a week, because I think that's pretty normal for someone on the channel watching. Would be like, okay, I want to train 3 days a week. Would you,
unless they're using the app, then it's probably 4 to 6.
Yeah, unless they're on peak strength, then they should be training at least 5 to 6 days a week. But great plug, Earl. If we're thinking through it, 3 days a week, are they doing like a total body lift every single day with a specific priority on each day, or how would they set that up?
Yeah, usually it would be that way.
Okay.
If it's 3 days a week, probably one of those 3 days we're going to hit some sort of sprinting. One of those 3 days we're going to do some sort of jumping. One of those 3 days we're going to do some sort of plyos. Probably 2 of those 3 days we're going to do some sort of Olympic movement, and then a frequency of 2 times. How do I say this? A 2 times frequency of a heavy lower body and a heavy upper body.
Okay.
So 2 out of those 3 days, we're getting some sort of heavy upper and heavy lower.
Would you have them? Okay, let's say it's a sprint day. Would you have them execute a sprint prior to a lift? Would you ever potentiate a sprint with a jump or with a weightlifting movement, anything like that?
Definitely not with a weightlifting movement, just because the Olympic lifts are so technical. I really want the athlete focused on what they're doing. I think it's really hard to like combine an Olympic movement with something else. I think it's really hard to do that, especially for a high school kid who already might have like some sort of ADHD or something like that. But I don't really like post-activation potentiation at all. So I rarely pair things up that way unless I have to do so for like time efficiency sake.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
I really don't do that as much as I can. Avoid it as much as I can.
Okay.
Well, I was scouring your Instagram researching for this, and you had a post. You talked about things you changed your mind on And one of the things I noted, and I think it's relevant here, is the French contrast training. You said you changed your mindset on it, and I was curious about it. Why? Because I know it's something we do often here in this system with, like, absolute strength movement into a plyometric movement, especially if the athlete's like overly strong and lacks that twitchiness and elasticity. So I was very curious about this.
Yeah, so the way I see French contrast, so I think French contrast often gets portrayed as a way to intensify the training stimulus, but I think it just de-intensifies the training stimulus. It's sprinting, or a French contrast is basically lifting heavy, doing some jumping, doing some plyos.
It's usually 3
But
in a
then when
row.
you're,
Okay.
yeah, it's
Eliminate one.
what is it? A strength movement, body weight plyo, a loaded jump, and then overspeed plyo. We can get into that too.
Yeah. You had a comment. I saw that too. So
Yeah,
continue.
we'll get into that too. I think it's kind of portrayed as this way to intensify the training stimulus, but if you're trying to lift something, but then you're doing 3 other movements subsequently right after, you're now making those subsequent movements. You're performing those movements under fatigue, which is you're gonna lower the output. You're gonna lower the outputs of those following movements, and yeah, I just think it de-intensifies the training stimulus and it makes it a little bit less productive. Like, I think you're better off just spending 10 to 15 minutes doing the jumping, doing the plyos, and then after that, you spend 15 to 20 minutes doing your squats, and you train those things individually, separately.
Do you ever find it's interesting that the individuals, I'm going to start talking a little trash, the individuals who might use something like French contrast might be the same individuals who talk about like the quality of a speed session and like a sprint session and how important it is to focus on like 3 to 4 minutes rest between each rep, like, and the technique around the sprint is extremely important. But then in the same vein, they're going and doing something like the French contrast where they are having 3 exercises. Sometimes I've even seen 4 in a row, and then using that as like
Yes.
potentiation. It's like, is that really potentiation or is that just some extra fatigue?
Right. Yeah, I've observed that same phenomenon too with certain individuals.
Same phenomenon. Okay. I wanted to bring up, dude, I want to bring up a lot. I maybe staying on the periodization stuff. I wanted to go into peaking. Okay, because this is like a genuine question, not me being a troll. Is like, let's say you've got, so we work with a lot of football players, a lot of which is not like a hard peak usually. A lot of wrestlers, not a traditional hard peak, but the collegiate system gets a little bit easier because of conference and because of NCAAs, like in the wrestling world. Now, like shot putters and stuff, we also work a ton with shot putters and weightlifters here. So it's the peaking model I would use is slightly different between those two based off of the sport qualities. My question is, one, how are you going to peak? Let's say if you're not using a traditional periodization model, how do you peak someone? And then two, how would you potentially peak somebody, let's say for football versus possibly wrestling versus possibly a weightlifter or a power lifter?
Yeah, so I don't even think about peaking at all. If I had a different population, like if I was working with track and field athletes, I'd probably seriously reconsider my approach to peaking. But with the athletes I work with, I don't even consider peaking at all. I just want to raise all of the qualities concurrently, and then like kind of the way I would look at it is this: raise all of their raised. You got raising the floor, raising the ceiling, right? I want to raise that floor as much as possible so that on any given day, their worst performance is still better than what it could have been if we didn't raise all of those floors. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
So on any given day, even if they have a shitty day, they're still better than what they could have been. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I think about it. I don't even think about peaking at all, especially with all the team sport athletes who play like the volleyball team I work with. They could play 4 days in 1 week. They could play 1 day in 1 week. It's just, you can't really do that with them.
Do you have
and then even with the
volleyball
high school
players,
kids I work with,
like taller athletes, this is an individual thing. Do you have them? Are they doing full range of motion squats? Are they doing partials? Are they doing front loaded, back loaded?
yeah, I'm not adjusting their range of motion for anything. They're still full cleaning, full snatching. The hardest thing they have problem with is like full snatching, but a lot of times I'll let them power snatch, and then I'll have them overhead squat the bar.
Okay.
And then eventually they get better at dropping underneath. They can catch it a little bit lower and a little bit lower and a little bit lower. So yeah, we're doing all that stuff with the taller athletes.
Okay. All right. I wanted to get into dynamic correspondence.
You like that one?
And I want Will to define. Well, I want to go into like 5 different things. I want to get into triphasic, your analysis and breakdown of that. I want to talk about dynamic correspondence and your definition or the definition that you follow, how you see it, where it begins, where it ends, and the issues you see with it. And there was one other thing I'm trying to think about right now. Oh, force velocity curve. So those are like 3 big things I want to touch on before we close out. And I guess start with dynamic correspondence.
All right, you're gonna have to remind me on the definition, because there's the definition from Berkshansky and I think it was Mel Sif maybe. And it was like,
so my comprehension is essentially like it's like as simple as possible, like
transfer. Yeah.
How well movements transfer, and you're essentially taking 5 characteristics,
5 or 6 of them.
Yeah,
yes.
And it's like
I think it was 5 of them. Yeah.
The regime of muscles that you're using, like what muscles,
the speed of it,
the impulse of
speed.
it, because they use force and time, but they didn't say that.
The angles,
the angle which you're applying it, or the plane maybe.
Amplitude.
Yeah, and then like the dynamic. There was like 2 of them that are like the dynamics of the movement, which I don't know what that even means.
Some of them sound like the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I basically just think dynamic correspondence is fake. I really like the approach of just like getting strong, getting powerful, getting fast, improving the overall ability of the organism to produce higher outputs, and then practicing your sport. When people try to justify things via like dynamic correspondence, you're going to end up like, if you follow that logic to the logical conclusion, you're going to end up doing a lot of goofy shit, man. You're going to end up doing like a bunch of T-spine rotation with the front leg elevated, medicine ball throw, elbow extension out in the front. There's like a bunch of weird shit. You know what I'm talking about? Like, do you follow Drew McDuffie? Do you know who he is?
Know who Drew McDuffie is.
He's like the quarterback specialist.
Oh yeah.
Like all the shit that he posts on Instagram of his quarterbacks doing things, it'll be like,
is he that
do
UVA?
These exercises? Yes.
Okay,
yeah,
I've seen him in my feed.
Do these exercises instead of a back squat. And it's like a guy on a slide board and doing a Cossack lunge with a 40-pound dumbbell. And then you read the caption, and he makes the dynamic correspondence argument that like, this is not in the frontal plane, this is in the transverse plane. We're loading up the front hip a little bit less than the back hip, and now we're getting some external rotation on the front hip. And it's like all of these justifications trying to use dynamic correspondence as the reasoning.
So,
but then you look at it, it's like that's a significant underload and underdose of training stimulus.
Okay, so I have 2 things.
You're not like improving the organism.
The brain, in my understanding, comprehends like, if no matter what direction we are working, the brain understands like proper recruitment, proper coordination. So I think that I think it has a minimal impact. The other aspect there is, when I asked this then is, okay, to play devil's advocate, what do you see then if you're using like accessory movements? Okay, what do you see the purpose of an accessory movement then? If we're doing a weightlifting exercise, which we term as like technical coordination, because they are technical and you have to coordinate very rapidly. And if you see that in one realm, and then you see maximum strength effort in another realm. If the third realm is doing accessories, what is the purpose of accessories in your mind?
Yeah, the purpose of accessory in my mind would probably just be um, a little bit of extra loading to the tissue that's being that's working.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
pretty simple like that. Yeah. How would you see it?
I think that would get into like the structural bodybuilding stuff.
Yeah, so I would see it two ways. That's where I would analyze the individual and their sport. Obviously, like if they're in a sport where they're in a weight class like a wrestler, I might change some of what they're doing, or if they if they don't struggle with localized endurance, like let's say like their shoulders, like some wrestlers when their shoulders or lats or grip like just dies. Some of them they don't ever have that issue in the third period. So if they don't have that issue, I might pick a wild ass exercise as an accessory that's like something related to them like getting into a collar tie. And I want to relate this back to this guy because I did learn a movement from him that I did like. He was taking like and I had done this a little bit with some of the swimmers that I work with. He was taking like a ball and throwing it over and throwing it backwards like this. And I actually liked it if it was like a weighted or a baseball that's soaked and you're throwing that back behind you. I don't dislike that, and I would use that as an accessory. And I guess that's why I wanted to see your thought process there. And I do think there is a point of I mean I don't disagree on the dynamic correspondence really just being sort of fake. That's like sort of what Dave Tate was saying too. He's like, we use this word, but it's really like there's still going to be a spectrum of like when it starts and when it ends, but it's in my mind way more general than we actually
I feel like dynamic
recognize.
correspondence when it was created was a way to like say this is why weightlifting movements, like traditional weightlifting movements, work, and it has pivoted to the point where people are trying to use it to say why we can use these weird, odd, not so typical movements to work. And it like
I would totally agree with that. It's like devolved.
Yeah, like there's like almost like a new hegemon coming along with it.
Hegemony.
Hegemony.
Yeah.
Hypertrophy too.
Yeah.
I have two questions for you, Will. I'm gonna go first with, since we were just talking about this, what are your go-to accessory movements? Like if you use them.
Before I answer, can you kind of define accessory?
Well, we'll use your idea, like building up to the tissue. So I'm thinking like bicep curls or something like that.
He's covering his.
Okay.
He's covering it.
Okay.
He's covering it so that no one can use this footage in the future.
So, would you consider like a pull-up an accessory though?
Yes and no. I
almost consider that like a max strength.
Yeah, me too. I load.
Okay.
Like a swimmer, I'd be like, "Yo, that's max strength for a swimmer."
I load that up too. I love loading that movement up with weight.
All right. So what I actually really like are Jefferson curls. Would we all consider that an accessory movement?
Yeah.
I would love to just put the spine in deep flexion and then load it up and slowly extend it, or even not even slowly extend it, but extend it under load. That'd probably be one of them. I'm just trying to think of like outside of the main basic barbell movements. Jefferson curl would probably be my number one. Outside of that, I don't know. I don't think I have like a favorite, or I wouldn't want to prioritize any other accessory. Yeah, but Jefferson curl for sure.
My second one, and I think this goes back to something you were saying within that whole dynamic correspondence. I read a comment of yours. You said power is not plane specific, but content dependent, and then had visual examples of like the sagittal, frontal, and transversal planes of like different things. Can you get into that comment? Like give us some context around it.
Yeah. So power is always good. It's going to be the result of the context that you're in. So this is kind of where the anti-Olympic lifting people will say you shouldn't do Olympic lifts because you can put 40-pound dumbbells in someone's hands and jump, and the power output is going to be higher with something like that. But they don't realize that the reason that the power output is higher is because you're self-selecting your depth on the counter movement. You're able to spend more time self-selecting these various like variables that contribute to the jump. You're spending more time producing force with the counter movement, and then you have really hard to like to hit these points briefly. You have more time to produce force because you have the counter movement. You're accelerating your body of mass. You're accelerating your center of mass a greater distance, giving yourself more time to accelerate and create more force. And then the result of it is like a higher power output compared to like a clean or a snatch. But the power output itself, the actual the unit that comes out, doesn't really matter in terms of what's creating the stimulus that's being placed on the body. Comparing an Olympic lift and a loaded jump. Right. So the power output may be higher, but that doesn't really matter. It's just the power output is higher because of the context that it's in.
There was a
and then
a recent one of the football teams I work with, guy sends me dudes squatting on force plates, and he's showing his team squatting on force plates to like a quarter squat or like a 90 degree, maybe a little above 90 degree, and then compares it to a full range of motion. And even the full range of motion, like it was like, I don't really think this is full range of motion, but okay. And he was saying that the power output was much higher on the athletes at 90 degrees or at like maybe 80. And I was like, first of all, I would very much challenge the methods he's using to show this, because he wasn't even showing. It was just like a very barely thrown together post. And also it's on Instagram, so to be fair to him, like whatever. But my discussion back was like, this is the ultimate question, is like, what's the goal of training? Like literally, what is the goal of training? And if we all thought as simply as that, like, what is the purpose of training? It's so someone comes in and let's say an athlete, we want to get them most likely better at their sport. How do we do that? The purpose is we have to apply a stimulus, which they then have an adaptation to. So even if in that acute setting, let's say it's accurate that shows that a 90-degree squat is more powerful, is that leading to the adaptation that we want, so that when they're executing something on the field, or a movement that's high speed that isn't loaded, is that showing that, is that adaptation from that movement going to transfer to that specific arena of what we're actually working towards? I think oftentimes sports performance coaches, like, they skew that, where it's like, okay, well, full range of motion squat has shown like sprint speed's better, vertical jump is better, even when your like joint angle or correspondence doesn't seem to be as precise relative to that quarter squat, or relative to the quarter squat or dumbbell snatch in your case. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. And then I make the point of so like a pitcher, right? Say an MLB pitcher can produce a higher power output on the mound throwing a baseball than like an Olympic weightlifter. But you would have to be insanely stupid to think that pitcher is a more powerful athlete than the Olympic weightlifter. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like it's the power output is context dependent, but I also wouldn't say that pitcher is like is a transverse power athlete. You know what I mean? So like it's not plane specific, it's just context dependent. If you put the weightlifter and the pitcher and have them both do another unrelated rotational movement, say take a 20-pound medicine ball, let them wind up as much as they want and throw it as hard as they can, I'd bet $100 that the weightlifter is going to produce higher power outputs throwing a medicine ball that way than the pitcher would. You know what I mean? So like it's context dependent, but it's not plane specific. And like let's just say you're doing like, you know what hide and bounds are, or skater jumps, one leg back and forth.
Yeah.
Are you really going to call that like frontal plane power? It's like, no, you're just going to call that like plyos. And then, there's going to be some sort of power adaptation that occurs from that. But that's kind of what I meant with that post.
No, I love your explanation with that too. It makes complete sense to me. So
All right, let's hear the force velocity curve stuff. Do you like what is?
Do you want to call it the load velocity curve yet, or no?
No, not yet. I want to see what it will like. So I had we had this huge throws comp recently. One of like big world record was broken. My one girl threw the furthest throw since 1986, like huge meet, and biomechanists are there like literally getting every reading of every single throw for the entire weekend. Like it was unbelievable. And I got to sort of prod the one guy who actually was into lifting and throwing and things, and he's well versed in sports performance, and he's like, yeah, I basically got him to admit that like he thinks the force velocity curve is absolutely like at the very best it's a very misguided graph or chart, and I had just brought up, I'm like, if you look at somebody who's squatting and that's supposed to be high force versus you look at somebody who's sprinting, that's supposed to be low force. But somebody who sprints might be, if you look at a 10-2 sprinter, that's pretty fast, but not like the fastest in the world. They're going to be handling like 5 to 5.5 times their body weight of force when they're sprinting, whereas somebody who's back squatting, it might be like 2.5 to 3 times. So it's like, I guess, what is your analysis of that? How do you handle that? And especially being, because I you are like traditionally educated on this as well, so you probably had to go through class with this as well. So I think that's
Yeah.
a question I had.
Yeah. This can kind of go back to like the loaded jumps discussion too, because you always hear this term like surfing the curve or something like that, where you got one end is high force, low velocity, the other end is high velocity, low force.
You get to hang
and
down.
then you have this curve. I don't know why I'm doing this in my hand, but in case someone's watching who doesn't know what the curve looks like. And it basically, I think a lot of like the prescription beyond that turns into, you need to hit all of these different parts of the curve to train for like a holistic training program, right? But it's like, if you're training in the middle of this curve, you're not improving this end, the extreme of this end, or the extreme of this end, and now you're stuck in the middle. And yeah, sure, like the linearity of that curve can deviate a little bit, and so now you're in this middle zone. And you guys see my pen, right?
Yeah.
So instead of the curve looking like that, now the curve may look like that, but that's not going to actually improve anything. Like you said, in an unweighted movement in sport, when there's high impulses and you're reacting to the contextual environment. So I would say like the load velocity curve or forceful, I use those terms synonymously. It exists, but it doesn't matter. You still want to train the ends of that spectrum. You don't want to sit in the middle zone and try to improve someone's like strength speed or speed strength or anything like that.
I think load velocity for an analysis, I would argue this, the load velocity analysis can be beneficial. Like I'll use the example, like we have a kid who comes in, kid can deadlift like 690, just like an absolute hoss, back squats 600 for reps. He's like 22, but he can't jump to save his life. Now, if he wasn't a power lifter, let's say he was training and he's a D tackle or something, I wouldn't do this, but if I did use load velocity, let's say, instead, and I could measure like, okay, well, he squats really well, but his jumps are terrible, I might spend more of his training trying to improve the technical aspect of his jumps and of his sprinting and of his, of those higher speed movements per se, or of that happen in a shorter time frame. But that would be like, I could see the efficacy of that. I'm not saying I do that, but I could see the efficacy in training someone in that regard. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just me weighing in my opinion. Sorry.
But I think a lot of people would look at that kid. A lot of strength and conditioning coaches who are misguided would look at that kid and say that I don't even know all the categories of that chart, but like strength, speed strength, accelerative strength, all these different things. They would probably say he's lacking in speed strength. And then based on that, kind of observation that they misguidedly come to, then they're going to misguidedly prescribe loaded jumps with 20-pound dumbbells because that's the speed strength. And then that's going to be what moves his force velocity curve over to the right when it really wouldn't. You're better off, like you said, performing plyometrics, performing tasks that really emphasize ground contact times and speed of the movement, and then you're still hitting like the max strength on the other end. I think that's what a lot of misguided strength and conditioning coaches would do, is they would prescribe these like speed strength prescriptions to the athletes, thinking it's going to shift their curve over.
Yeah. All right, I wanted to ask the triphasic question, because I feel like another aspect that I see often is like my education in the realm of everything. I've been like sort of like non-traditionally educated in performance. A lot of my experience with traditionally educated performance is like you get taught like triphasic work, you get into triphasic training, you spend most of your time in the triphasic world. And like occasionally I see people sort of break out or not break out, but or sort of like stop and they'll change something else. Do you have any experience or analysis or commentary on it?
Yeah, I ran like a full 13-week cycle of triphasic on myself, probably like 5 or 6 years ago. And at the time I liked it. But I think I recognize a lot of its flaws and kind of like inconsistencies of the logic, I think.
Is that,
Yeah.
I mean, does that have
Triphasic's the one that's like with the eccentrics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess my question off of that is, what is your take then on like overspeed work, overspeed jumps, overspeed? I mean, even overspeed sprinting, let's say.
I'm a fan of overspeed sprints, but I'm not a fan of like band assisted jumps. The bands, they essentially reduce your body weight, so the landing is less intense. I had so many more things to say about this a year ago. I put a video out on it. Now I don't really remember. It's a way to underdose the jumping, essentially, a band assisted jump. It's an underdose of the jumping. Really, the only time I would use it, and I don't even know if I'd use it in this case, but the only time I'd probably use it is if I was working with someone who had like an Achilles issue, a knee issue, and they have to gradually reintroduce jumping volume, and they're not at a point where they can handle like intense plyos and intense body weight jumping. So we'll underload their jumping volume with the band. But that's basically it. There's no actual demand for increasing the rate of force development with the band. The band's assisting you. So like there's no actual demand. Like what's the negative consequence if you don't produce force at a high rate when you're using a band? There is no negative consequence. You're still jumping higher. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's my take on the band, like the overspeed jumping. But I really like the overspeed sprinting because there's an actual negative consequence if your stride frequency is too slow when you're using an overspeed sprinting. The negative consequence is that you fall on your face. There's no negative consequence with the band assisted jumps.
I think that's the whole part of like the like functional world is like it's so easy it's so easy in these cases. I mean, using the reverse band, because I didn't use them for 10 years and then I had them this year for 8 weeks and saw no change in anything jumps based.
I was curious though, if you did the assisted with the band but let it go for the landing, so it no longer assisted,
and then did like a depth drop almost.
Yeah, but then I thought too you could just do a depth drop, and why would it matter? Right?
Yeah.
Well, aren't you the one that did depth drops from like 15 feet or something crazy? Was that you?
Yeah, and now I used to really like depth drops.
That was the craziest shit I saw. That's where I thought you were stupid.
I don't know if I really like depth drops anymore though. I have to think about it.
Dude, I swear there's a video of him dropping from like.
Yo, that's
feet.
Cool.
Yeah,
I think it was like 98 inches. I think is what it was.
That's high.
So like 9 feet, maybe 8, 8.5. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so I
That's
guess
why you should jump off swings when you're a kid.
well, that I think there is actually trampoline work and doing things like that as a child, I think is a different that's where it's
Yeah.
like looking at population specific stuff. I think where I was thinking with trying to think where I was gonna go with the
I have a question around the centric
go ahead.
loads.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was scouring your IG. You wrote, if you can control a centric for a designated time, it's not training eccentric force production to the fullest. And I feel like this conversation leads into that. Can you explain, give us some more context around that and nuance?
Yeah. So this kind of goes back to the triphasic stuff. Have you guys read the book, the triphasic book?
I have not.
No.
Yeah, I recently like went back and reread it. But basically, the book prescribes using accentuated eccentrics with 85% of your 1RM. And so if you're using 85% of your 1RM, you can like really control the eccentric on that. So the term that's always used is you're stronger eccentrically than you are concentrically. It's like, well, that's kind of like a poor framing, because of course you can lower something under control more than you can lift it. Like that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you can control the eccentric for a designated time, let's just say you want to control it for 6 seconds. And if you have the bar on your back and you can squat down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's a submaximal eccentric contraction.
Yeah.
Especially if you can stand up with the weight. Does that answer your question?
Well,
like in order to truly train an eccentric contraction to the fullest extent, you'd have to use a weight that as soon as the weight's on your back, you can't control it. It has to push you down as hard as you are pushing back into the bar. It's going to still push you down. And then to really train it to the full extent, you'd have to be pushing as hard as you can, and it'd have to push you down really fast. You'd have to resist it as much as possible, but you still can't resist it.
So this is a question that you're literally with what you were just describing, you would be playing around right on the verge of like a weight crushing you or not crushing you. Like you're literally, that's where you would be playing around. The one thing that I have always found very interesting with this debate, I guess some of my hesitations have been like, I know someone who wrote a book on triphasic training and then a year later stopped using triphasic training, and they literally wrote a book on it. It's like, what? This just seems odd. But then my question is like, if you look at like you catch a 160K clean off of 2 boxes, there's like 2 things here. One, the range of motion and the pull is extraordinarily short if you're going from like above the knee. So impulse is ungodly high. Your body's learning how to coordinate very quickly with a technical skill. So now we can look at like, this is a technical skill. You're recruiting very, very high speed. You're catching the clean. And if you look at the, like when you catch and you get a bounce out of the bottom, like the force is like through the roof, but no one will acknowledge, or very few people anyway, acknowledge that sort of like when you get the bounce versus if you're doing these reverse bands or you're doing things like that. It's like, why is that
100%?
Maybe that's my question, is why do you feel that is consistently ignored?
I think we just have a culture in like mainstream strength conditioning of anti-Olympic lifting, and people have just like brainwashed themselves into thinking that if you use the Olympic lifts in your training, you're training for the sport of weightlifting, which is just it's untrue. I think we just have a culture in mainstream strength conditioning that says that, and it's like, that's become like the mainstream opinion. I don't know why.
Well, that's why
I think probably over time people have coaches like our age. Dan, how old are you?
40. I'm older than you.
I'm 31. So like when I was in college, so like 2012, 2013, 2014, I think a lot of like college programs were using the Olympic lifts, but they've slowly been phased out because people about my age didn't have an interest in learning them. They probably were told in classes that the dynamic correspondence of Olympic lifts is low compared to other methods, and all these various reasons that now they're getting phased out. So people don't actually understand the stimulus that they provide to the body. Just like you were saying, like catching a full clean in the bottom of your squat and then having to use that rebound, dude, that's training the elastic qualities of the lower body in deep ranges of motion. What other method is better for training elastic qualities in deep ranges of motion better than Olympic lift? There's not one. So I think there's a lot of like unrecognized benefits of the Olympic lifts that people don't really see. And there's a lot of benefits of the Olympic lifts that aren't necessarily quantifiable, like something like that.
Yeah.
And so people just don't recognize it.
I guess, Earl, did you have anything? Because I wanted to ask him a question specific to like endurance athletes.
I do have one more, but I don't think it relates at this time. So it's like maybe a little bit. I'm just gonna ask it anyway. Heck on it. Another comment. Lift lightweight fast is redundant. I read. I was like, and I just put like a big. I agree with this, but where does this come from? Like, what stems like a feeling of having to say this? Like,
yeah. Do you guys follow Schmarzo, Max Schmarzo?
Yeah.
Strong by Science guy. He always talks about like you should lift heavyweight slow and lightweights fast. And like it's like, of course, if you lift a lighter weight, it's going to be faster. There's no need of saying lift lightweights fast, because even when lifting heavyweights, the intent is still to move it as fast as possible. So don't classify heavyweights as slow lifting. Just lift heavyweights, and then when the weight gets a little bit lower, you're just inducing a little bit less fatigue. You should be able to move it faster. And then it kind of goes back to the rate of force development thing. Like rate of force development doesn't necessarily need to be the end goal. It's just kind of a byproduct of good training. So like when you're training lightweights fast, usually the justification is we want to train rate of force development. Well, rate of force development is going to get developed regardless if you're training with high intent and attempting to move things fast. Rate of force development is still going to get trained. So yeah.
Okay, I got two things quick. I know you got to go, Will. This is one thing I think around dynamic correspondence. So when I train with Bunderchuk, we would go through like almost like general strength patterns. We wouldn't lift super heavy, but he was getting a population of athletes that were already very strong, like strong in the sense of like absolute strength and stuff like this. We would still do Olympic lifts. We would still do back squats. We just wouldn't go super, super heavy. We would do things like at the end of a day of training, we would do like 40-pound dumbbell throws as a shot putter, 40, things like that, like very much mimicking the actual throw. And I think that's maybe where correspondence was used in the Soviet system that we then would see and bring and be like, oh, that's something that maybe we should do more of. And I guess that's that's sort of where my own personal accessory analysis comes into play. I guess I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that specifically.
Yeah, I would definitely say, because I'm not a huge fan of like medicine ball throws, but if you're going to throw something, I think you're way better off using a heavy load and throwing it. I think that makes a lot more sense than using like a 6-pound medicine ball.
We would use like literally 40-pound dumbbells. And the chicks would use like a 25 to 30-pound dumbbell.
Yeah, I would see value in that.
Or even concrete blocks, which were around like 20, and you'd be shot putting them. My other question was,
and that's at least an overload.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing is like, we would often have like, I think this is the downfall with a lot of this stuff. We would have measurements. Like that's the one thing that I think is that I see some functional movements in the same realm as like an agility ladder. It's like you have minimal measurement of progress. So it's sort of easy to hide the progression that somebody is or is not making because you're not able to actually quantify it. Last question before you have to bounce is, if you got like a distance runner that comes in, a marathoner, let's say, what are you going to do in that case? Are you going to say, okay, you need to squat more to get better, or are you going to say, I guess, yeah, that's my question.
I definitely would be a proponent of them squatting more. Like we already kind of talked about, I think dynamic correspondence is mostly a myth. So I would never frame a distance runner squatting more as a way to improve their performance in endurance running. I would frame it as getting stronger, building more muscle, has all these various health benefits outside of the context of sports performance. That's why we're going to do it.
Okay.
You put more muscle on, you're stronger. You can regulate blood sugar better. You can regulate hormones better. You have a stronger skeleton. You have stronger ligaments and tendons. All this connective tissue is going to be stronger, more resilient, more robust. So that's the way I'd frame it.
Okay. Well, thanks for tuning in, or thanks for coming on the podcast. I was excited to do this. I hope we can get you on again because I've got about 30 other.
Oh, let's do it.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Let's set one up, guys.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Will.
All right. See you guys.
Peace.
Later.